So just how important is computational thinking?
The overarching goal of the 2014 Computing National Curriculum is to equip children to use computational thinking and creativity to change the world. Now, embedding computational thinking and creativity into our classrooms is ambitious enough, but to change the world is quite a goal, isn't it? But we have to be realistic that it's not curriculums that teach children, it's teachers. And over the coming months and years, we need to support teachers to achieve that.
Okay, but computational thinking is not really mentioned that much in the national curriculum.
No, it's not, Pete, explicitly in the points of study, but I promise you it is there. At Key Stage 1, pupils should be able to create and debug simple programs. At Key Stage 2, pupils should be able to, amongst other things, solve problems by decomposing them into smaller parts and use sequencing, selection and repetition in programs. Work with variables and various forms of input and output, and also detect and correct errors in algorithms and programs. At Key Stage 3, pupils should be able to make appropriate use of data structures, design and develop modular programs that use procedures or functions, and also understand simple Boolean logic, for example, and, or, and not, and some of its uses in circuits and in programming. So there's an interpretation led by the popular media that the new computing curriculum is all about coding, and I think this is really misleading because actually computing is a subject with its own body of knowledge that equips students to become independent learners, evaluators and potentially designers of new technology, which is really exciting. But it's not only about subject knowledge. By studying computing, children will develop a unique way of looking at problems through something called computational thinking. So the new national curriculum sees computer science going into the curriculum alongside what we would know as ICT. But we've now can break ICT down into two distinct strands, both information technology, IT, and digital literacy. So what we have now in the national curriculum is three unofficial strands that came out of the Royal Society report that are made up of computer science, information technology, and digital literacy, with computational thinking sitting at the heart of that new curriculum.
Okay, so I understand where computational thinking fits in, but what exactly is it?
Well, it's a way of humans solving problems, and despite what you think, it's actually not about getting humans to think like computers. So it's about helping us to conceptualize problems. It's not about programming, although programming can be an output from doing computational thinking.
Okay, so how does that help us?
Well, it helps us to solve problems that none of us would think possible individually or collaboratively. It helps us to understand what humans are better at than computers, but it's also to help us to understand what computers are better at than humans, and the ultimate question in our subject of what is computable. And I think it's important to remember that computational thinking isn't a recipe, it's a framework to help us to guide computational design by ensuring that we ask the right questions.
So why is this really important in terms of my students?
Okay, so from my experience, there are four main reasons to be doing computational thinking in the classroom that really develops the pupils or students as a whole. The first one is dealing with complexity, but also persistence in problem solving and building that resilience that I think that is so critical to pupils' current learning needs, but also future employment needs. But to some extent also dealing with tolerance, tolerance for ambiguity and open-ended problems. But I think the biggest development or improvement I've seen in my students was their ability to communicate and collaborate with others to achieve a common goal or task.
Okay, but what does computational thinking look like in my classroom?
So if we go to the pedagogy of the subject, we would say it looks like constructionism. So student-led discovery-based learning where they use existing knowledge and understanding to acquire new knowledge and understanding. And computing at schools have developed a new framework called Developing Computational Thinking in the Classroom which really is designed to help teachers to embed computational thinking into their practice.
So is there anything that I can use to help me embed computational thinking inside my classroom?
Unfortunately, there isn't a shared definition or set of concepts for computational thinking. This is why Computing at School developed the computational thinking framework. It's by a group of teachers and academics, and it's designed to support teachers. And this framework presents a definition of computational thinking that we believe is suitable for the classroom. Computational thinking is the thought processes involved in formulating problems and their solutions, so that the solutions are represented in a form that can be effectively carried out by an information processing agent. So the information processing agent can either be a human, a computer, or a combination of both human and computer. But if we just go back to the computational thinking framework, the next thing we need to do is think about a list of concepts. And the framework has 5: abstraction, decomposition, algorithmic thinking, evaluation, and generalization. And it goes on to describe a menu of classroom approaches and techniques that the classroom teacher can use to implement these concepts. And these techniques are particularly useful for supporting teachers with evaluating their existing resources, but also new resources that they would potentially want to use in the classroom.
Okay, so I've got the national curriculum and I've got the computational thinking framework. What can I use to link these two aspects together?
Okay, so the glue to linking the computational thinking framework and the national curriculum together, which are two kind of high-level documents, is the progression pathways assessment framework, which we actually have in front of us. And the reason it's so useful is because it's an interpretation of the breadth and the depth of the subject, and it's been published by Computing at School. And if we take one of these learning outcomes, for example, orange under communications and networks, it says to understand the difference between the World Wide Web and the internet. And then after it, it says abstraction. So as a teacher, I can now use that to think, okay, I now need to think about abstraction. I can look down my menu of teaching techniques for abstraction and then evaluate the resource that I've got in front of me to consider which are the teaching techniques that resource will cover. And the Quick Start Computing materials has an interactive progression pathway which really glues these three areas together.